Let me just do this after. Yeah, okay. So the meeting is now being recorded, and I'll hand over at this stage now to the Chairman, Councillor Richard Young.
Thank you, Simon. Welcome, everybody. This is a different meeting, isn't it? It's certainly a different meeting to what I'm used to at the Orbit Centre. Welcome, as I said, to everybody. And apologies to those that have come from the Commissioner's office, because although we had the pre-meeting before this meeting, I'm afraid it was taken up rather with sorting out some glitches that we had. So on that basis, we didn't have the opportunity to go through that part of the agenda, so I'm going to do that now. But having said that, if you bear with us, and I thank you for it, I don't think we have any apologies this morning, but I'll ask the question, do we have any apologies? I'm not aware of any.
Well, there is, yes. Councillor Christine Richards from Swansea, and Councillor William Evans from Swansea. William Evans was with us for the pre-meeting, but has had to leave.
Yeah,
Swansea have got an extraordinary council meeting scheduled for the same time, so they've had to leave. Both have said that if it finishes before this meeting, they will endeavour to join us. So yeah, there's two apologies, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that, Simon. So item 2 is, if I can ask, are there any declarations of interest, please? I don't have any. No? I'll take the silence as a no then. Item number 3 on the agenda is the appointment of Chair and Vice Chair. So at this point, I'll hand over to Simon, if I may.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, item 3 is the appointment of the chairperson for the next year. Can I ask, are there any nominations for chairperson?
Nominate Richard Young.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody going to second that?
Seconded.
I'll second it.
Okay, probably easier if I ask, are there any votes against that nomination?
No.
No, okay, nobody's indicated. So on that basis, the resolution is that Richard Young take the role of the chair for the next year. So on that basis, Richard, I'll hand it back to you for the next agenda item.
Thank you, Simon. And the next agenda item is the appointment of the Vice Chair for the coming year of 2021. Can I have a nomination? I have a nomination of Mel Jayo. Do I have a seconder, please?
Yes, I'll second that.
Thank you very much. All in favour?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll take that as a yes. Okay. Are there any against?
No.
I'll take the silence as no, and I don't suppose there are any abstentions. Oh, thank you for that. That's excellent. Can I thank you once again for your confidence in me for the coming year? And I'm sure if Mel would like to say something.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Be assured of 100% commitment, as usual. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that, Mel. The next item on the agenda is the minutes of the meeting, that fateful meeting, as far as I'm concerned, of January the 30th. So we need to endorse those minutes. So can you all see the meetings? We've had them in advance. We've got them right. Okay, so I'm going to take these page by page. So page 1 is simply the makeup of the panel. So page 2. Page 3.
Chair?
Mel?
Yeah, I think that's one issue. It's just a typo. It is. You see down page 3, you see Umar Hussain gave a financial. I think Umar's name is spelled incorrectly there. I don't think it's UMA. I think it's UMAR. Just.
Okay, we can look at that and amend as appropriate. Okay. Okay. So page 4. Thank you for that, Mel.
No problem.
Page 5. No? Can I have someone to move that they're true and accurate record with the amendment?
I move, Chair.
Move.
Second it?
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Okay, I don't know how I'm going to sign these now, Simon. Perhaps you better send them to me, and I'll do it electronically. However. Okay, thank you for that. Item 5 is the forward work programme. Meeting dates for 2020-21. Simon, can I ask you to come in here?
Yeah, this is a report we put up every year. It's only the bare bones. If you look at it, we don't put a great deal of detail in. You'll see that there are certain sort of landmark matters that have to be dealt with at certain meetings, and that's the consideration in the annual report. And the proposed precept, which is scheduled for the 28th of January. But as is always the case, it's open to any member to put an agenda item onto a meeting. So the main purpose of this is to set out meeting dates, really, so we can firm up everyone's diaries for the forthcoming year. So the dates I've used are pretty much similar to last year. I've had to change. I tried to do these on I think a Tuesday, I think they are, or a Thursday. I can't remember. I think they're Tuesdays. So I tried to get every single one to sit on a Tuesday, and that's the purpose of this report, basically, to firm up the dates for the year. Richard,
Chair,
you're muted.
I'm muted. Yeah, okay, everybody happy with those dates?
Yes, Chair.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Thank you for that. And the next item on the agenda is the update from South Wales Police Response Group. And on this, what we've decided to do, Commissioner, is to allow you to make your report, and unless there is a burning question that needs to be asked by the panel, we won't be asking questions during your report. However, what I will do at the end of your report is to call each member in attendance alphabetically to see if they have any questions that they would like to ask you, and give you the opportunity then for you to respond. Are you happy with that, Commissioner?
Very happy indeed. Sorry, I had to unmute myself.
Yeah.
Very happy with that process, and look forward to responding to any questions that members of the panel have.
Thank you for that. On that basis, can I invite you to make your report, please?
Well, thank you very much indeed. And what I want to do is to give a brief insight into how I've fulfilled my role since January. And indeed, I'm very pleased that the panel has called this meeting to hold me to account, because that's a very important part of the role and the structures of accountability. So to start with, I want to stress one thing, which is that COVID-19 has created a medical emergency and not a policing emergency. So I'll come to the role of the police in a moment. But if there was anything that brought it home to me, it relates to the Help Point in Swansea. There's been no nighttime economy, obviously, as a result of the pandemic. So we've turned the Help Point building over to local GP practices for seeing patients. All very sensible. But the real shock to us came with the death from COVID-19 of Gareth Davis, a paramedic by profession, but as a volunteer commissioner with St. John, the person who worked with members of my team, particularly Janine and Dan, to make the Help Point a success. And he devoted an enormous amount of voluntary time to the safety of young people in Swansea. So the loss of Gareth to COVID-19 brings it home to us just the extent to which this is a medical emergency leading to people's deaths, rather than purely a matter that concerns policing. Having said that, the challenge for the police has been threefold. Firstly, supporting the work of the NHS through the powers of enforcement given to the police in the emergency legislation. Now, that legislation, those rules are there for the protection of the public, for the protection of all of us. And from the start, I've been calling on the public to obey the rules, not because they're afraid that the police will come round and arrest them, but because it's right to do, in the same way that, for instance, when the legislation came in on smoking in Wales, people stopped smoking in public places because they recognised that was the law, it's the right thing to do, we are a law-abiding society. So that's quite important. And those messages of stay home, protect the NHS, save lives that matter, rather than the fear of arrest. Similarly, it's very important indeed that the approach of the police in South Wales has been to explain, to engage, to persuade, to encourage, and only to use enforcement when it's necessary. That's no different in general to the way in which our police engage in their local communities all the time. But it's the set of principles that have been pursued during the course of the pandemic. And I think that that has worked really well. I think the police have worked intelligently, sensitively. They've taken the public with us. That has been helped by the standard of communication in Wales. I've got to say, the clarity of decisions and the clarity of communication by the First Minister has really helped. But then that has been something that's run through everything, the way that police officers communicate with the public, the way that the First Minister and officers at every level have worked with us to get the messaging right, and the effort that's been put in by the Chief Constable, his leadership team, and everybody right down to police officers and PCSOs right through the community. If there was one image that brought that home to me, the way in which the public have come with us, and all credit to the public for that, it was the contrast the weekend before last between the beaches in Bournemouth and Brighton and the beaches in South Wales, where people had observed the legislation, were clearly staying away from concentrating in public places. And that is successive communication by Welsh Government. Let's give the credit there where it's due. Success in the work that local government has done, but also success in the police in the way that they have followed those 4E principles, been a part of the community. The second aspect of policing work has been carrying on with their work in the community despite having the same worries about health and the health of their own children, same problems with childcare, problems and worries about elderly relatives, as all the rest of us. And again, my plea has been for the public not to make the work of the police more difficult, because the police have had to carry on dealing with the normal issues: drug trafficking, violence, burglary, theft, fraud. And while some aspects of crime were reduced during the pandemic, those things didn't go away. Our biggest concern from the start was that domestic violence and abuse, and also child abuse, might be hidden during the pandemic. So I and the Chief Constable were very active personally from day one on social media, asking people to make their reports of domestic violence, and to understand that South Wales Police were responding as normal to reports of domestic violence. And Emma will say a little bit more about that matter in the moment, because on my behalf and on behalf of the other commissioners, she's been undertaking some work with Welsh Government on that. The third work for the police themselves has been taking the lead in the emergency arrangements. The local resilience forum clicks into place with the SCG, I think it's Special Command Group, during an emergency, being chaired by the police. And that has really operated very effectively at a South Wales level, and also at an All Wales level, with our temporary ACC, Andy Valentine, chairing the Gold Group nationally and linking in with Welsh Government. Now, throughout all of this, communication has been paramount. And at every level, we've aligned between us and our communications and those of our partners. So the Chief Constable and myself have on a regular basis had contact ourselves. Lee, my Chief Executive, has linked with Andy Valentine in terms of the emergency processes. Emma has taken a lead role in terms of, for instance, the release of prisoners, as well as domestic violence and so on. But we've also, during this period, had an extraordinary number of meetings. We've met weekly between the commissioners and the policing minister. We've met weekly with the lead official in Welsh Government. We've had communications with the First Minister and other ministers. We also, at an England and Wales level, have had discussions, for instance, with the Lord Chancellor, Robert Buckland. Now, that's of some particular importance because there is another emergency coming towards us, and that's the emergency in the criminal justice system with the backlog of cases. As you can imagine, it's enormously difficult with social distancing to have meetings of jury trials with the large number of people that are involved. And whereas you will have seen the headline that some cases are restarting, they're basically cases that are involving one defendant and relatively small numbers of people. So Lee Jones and myself have taken a lead in saying, can we do things differently? I've got to pay credit to the lawyers, the QCs in the Wales and Chester circuit, who approached us and said, the health service started to create courts, to create hospitals in big spaces. Should we do a similar thing with the courts rather than just taking courts as they are? So I approached the leader and the chief executive in Cardiff. The result of that was meeting involving the court service, looking at the possibility of Cardiff City Hall being used for trials. The Lord Chancellor, Robert Buckland, who has acknowledged the extent to which we've built partnership between the criminal justice bodies in Wales, gave us encouragement. And since then, we've gone further with starting, and again, very grateful to colleagues in local government, the leader and the chief executive in Swansea in particular, during the course of this week, looking at the possibility of Swansea Guildhall being a venue for those trials. So all of those meetings, right from national level down to what's happening on the street, have led to a very intense period of time. I would say with the Lord Chancellor, it's been a good piece of good fortune for us that he was a QC working on the Wales and Chester circuit and said to us very clearly that his door was open to us if we had issues we wanted to raise in relation to the criminal justice system in Wales. We've taken that opportunity and he's responded very positively to us. So I think the next point I'd just like to come to is the extent to which we have tried to maintain business as usual. The high ambition that the Chief Constable and myself have shared of wanting to see the standards of policing in South Wales maintained, even during an extraordinary period, as it's been for all of us. Holding to account goes on. So we have had, during the pandemic period, 2 meetings of my strategic board, going through issues with the Chief Constable, including a lot of things looking to the longer term future, the buildings, the training of staff and the recruitment of staff with the uplift that's taking place. Yesterday we had a meeting of our main scrutiny board, and Lee will give you a little insight to the way that that has been pursued in a moment. And then continuing to drive innovation. As say, Emma will say a little bit about her work, but before she does, I just want to give one piece of good news to the panel. You'll know that at the meeting in January, by the way, I omitted at the beginning, Richard, to welcome you back to full health after the fall that you had as you left that meeting. That's a discourtesy of me at the beginning of my remarks, but it's great to see you back in the chair. But at that meeting, I explained that we were going to expand the work of Drive, continue the work with perpetrators that already exists in Merthyr and RCT and in Cardiff, and to extend that to the rest of South Wales. Obviously, there's been a little bit of disruption to our plans there, but I am able to say that even during this time, interviews have taken place for new staff, and the DRIVE programme of intervening with perpetrators will be extended to from Cardiff to the Vale of Glamorgan and from RCT and Merthyr to Bridgend in July, only 2 months later than we had originally planned. And we plan to extend it to Swansea and Neath Port Talbot in September, which is the aspiration that I reported to the panel in January. So the work to enable us to do that has been going on even during the pandemic period. We are currently, of course, looking to recovery and business as usual. My colleague Mark Brace has been talking to each local authority about the restoration of the work of the public services boards. We're responding to a report on youth justice in Cardiff and working with the chief executive and councillors and colleagues there. Our community safety board, which has now been established jointly between Policing and Wales and the Welsh Local Government Association, the WLGA, which I co-chair with the WLGA lead, will be meeting next month. And the Policing Board for Wales will continue its work. And in the meeting again next month, the Secretary of State for Wales has now agreed to join that meeting. His predecessor wasn't willing to do so, which again is a significant development. If I may, I'll just ask Emma to say a few words and then Lee to give that report, and then just come back to one final item, Richard, if I may. So if I can ask Lee to come in at that point, and I'll go on to mute.
Sorry, did you want me or Emma first?
Lee first.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. In strange circumstances, I hope you can all hear me clearly. I won't go on too long, but just to refer to the scrutiny, which is of course to give you reassurance that despite the circumstances, we've had a very positive response from the force in terms of ensuring that they've been keeping us essentially in the loop, and that we've been able to maintain oversight of the force's response during this period. As the Commissioner has said, this is a health dilemma, but actually South Wales Police have played a key role with their experience in terms of responding to emergencies, in therefore leading with the Resilience Forum in particular, and then very much also ensuring that is being fed up to us. So actually, for the force, the challenges that we're well aware of is maintaining the business as usual, but also an extra layer of responding to COVID-19, particularly when you've got an additional enforcement powers that have also added to this, and the general concerns in terms of the staffing and resourcing of South Wales Police. So as the Commissioner stated, there has been a number of additional channels that we've established through the last 2 or 3 months, where there's been direct engagement with the Commissioner himself or the Commissioner's team, both with the national and regional response. So I, on behalf of the Commissioner, have had bi-weekly updates from Andy Valentine, who's led on behalf of the force, the SCG. We have also had daily, actually twice, if not 3 times daily updates that come from the Welsh Government, what they call the ECCW, the Emergency Planning Group, of which both South Wales Police and Commissioners are fed in through the head of the Police Liaison Unit, with updates on what any national developments or changes in the regulations, etc., have also been fed up. In order for us to then sort of coordinate a huge amount of activity, as the Commissioner again has stated, we've held 2 Commissioner strategic boards, both have given us updates from a force perspective on activity and how the force is coping in relation to responding to COVID-19. Of more specific detail, yesterday we held an accountability and legitimacy board, which was chaired by myself. Consists of a number of partners from a number of agencies and some independent members, for which we had an update on the force response, operational response on COVID-19. It's been referred to as Operation Talia. I won't go through all of the detail with that. It's more of a reassurance to you that that was a very detailed report. It outlined issues. The headlines really were around that South Wales Police has been effective in the enforcement approach, but it's very much been within the parameters that have been set publicly. To give you a bit of a headline in terms of maybe South Wales's approach to educate and inform, as opposed to primarily enforcement, South Wales Police, as of weekend just gone, have issued a total of 216 fixed penalty notices across South Wales. This compares to, for Dyfed Powys, for example, who issued 816. So you can see this. Maybe there is this, even though across Wales, I think all the chiefs have been fairly consistent in their approach in terms of the application. South Wales, I think, has been more in line with the measured approach that the Commissioner has laid out. The demand for service has remained high. There are certain traditional areas which dipped, probably because pubs and clubs in essence aren't open, without going into detail. But it has meant then that resources have been able to be diverted to respond into an increase in what is classed as antisocial behaviour, but really that's because of any calls coming in relation to the enforcement of the new regs have been categorised under ASB. But what we are finding now, as the calls in relation to the emergency regulations are starting to go down, and as lockdown restrictions maybe are easing, that the levels of criminality are coming back more to normal position. In terms of police staffing levels as well, resources, actually it's been quite pleasing. There was an initial reduction, as people in the initial phase of COVID, obviously as the Commissioner has stated, they're human like everybody else, police officers and police staff. They were also victims of the pandemic, but that has leveled up, and actually extraction levels are better in comparison to this time last year, pre-COVID, both in police staffing levels and police frontline officer levels. So again, maybe that is also in part with because of nighttime economy in particular has reduced. A lot of it, of course, is in relation to a large amount of cooperation, partnership working with yourselves in terms of local authorities, representing local authorities, and a huge element of community compliance across Wales, which has been really pleasing to see. And what we're also getting from partners is they've been really pleased in terms of the engagement with policing, particularly around a number of vulnerable areas. There was a spike in calls around the period of the VE celebrations, unfortunately. Again, you probably saw that in the media yourself, but that was just a spike. It was managed and resolved. Areas, interestingly, South Wales Police are finding that came out that areas such as the drug market is very innovative, and they're finding ways to adapt to the pandemic. But the drug trade has also been quite exposed, particularly in the early days of lockdown, which has led, and again, you would have seen some quite high profile cases in the media. But there's also another sort of positive that I wanted to mention is the issues around volunteers. Special Constabulary have made a significant contribution, and again, the support that you have made in terms of supporting volunteers, both Special Constabulary, etc., I think has had a huge benefit in terms of the community engagement to keeping everybody safe and healthy. So, as I suppose the reassurance from me is that we have had significant engagement, significant in communication on effectively a daily basis at various levels, operationally through right up to the strategic. Probably, I would say, even more so than regularly, where we may have relied on less frequent meetings, but because of the nature of this and the extra level, we've had a significant engagement. And the force themselves, this is still a work in progress. It's still very fluid. but we're fairly reassured, and I'm fairly reassured on behalf of the Commissioner yesterday with the amount of detail provided by Superintendent Mark Atwell at yesterday's scrutiny meeting, that this is being tracked and monitored. We are looking at if there are potential for any spikes or trends or any areas of concern, and we will continue that monitoring process. So that's a rapid run through. I hope that's some reassurance and some help. Obviously, as the chair said, if there are any immediate questions, happy to take them. If not, I'll hand back to the Commissioner.
Thanks very much, Lee. So, Emma, can I ask you to cover the points that I mentioned, and perhaps say a bit about the recovery process in relation to the blueprints as well?
Yeah, you can. So good morning all. I hope you and all your families have kept safe and well during this period. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, fabulous. So as the Commissioner has mentioned, I just wanted to give you a bit of a flavour of 3 critical areas where we've played a significant leadership role during the COVID response. So first of all, around the violence against women, domestic abuse and sexual violence agenda. As the Commissioner mentioned, I have been representing all 4 commissioners on the Welsh Government VAWDR SV COVID Strategic Response Group, which has met weekly since the restrictions were imposed, obviously as a reflection of Welsh Government's and partners' commitment to the priority area that we felt would present a significant risk during this time. The group is made up of a number of umbrella bodies who represent specialist sector providers and some key statutory services, so namely policing, who obviously has a significant role to play in this space, and Public Health Wales colleagues. So the focus of that meeting has really been on 3 significant areas for me. One was the immediate impact on local services. Certainly a number of smaller providers have challenges in trying to move their service provision or maintain their service provision whilst moving to a working from home pattern, as well as obviously having increased demand from a funding perspective in PPE requirements and other issues that they needed to address in order to maintain services to victims and service users. That's provided us with a real opportunity as a group of commissioners to be able to intervene early where that's needed, to permit variations to contract and service delivery, and also support with funding where that was needed. The second area of focus of that group was to try to get a real handle on the nature of occurrences around VAWDR SV and the volume. So you'll note from our report in South Wales, it showed an immediate drop-off in terms of domestic abuse occurrences when restrictions were imposed, but that's had a gradual increase, albeit it's still down on numbers that we would have expected to see this time last year. And I think there was also a significant discrepancy between volume of traffic, call traffic to national helplines, and what local providers are seeing by way of referrals. So we really wanted to work collaboratively to try to get a good sense of where these victims were, what those numbers were telling us. And in doing so, we've been able to bring to bear the resources from the Violence Prevention Unit that South Wales Police has been leading on setting up, that has a Wales remit, to make sure they've mobilised their efforts to focus on supporting collation of that data picture. The third area I wanted to mention is the critical importance of communication. So really having discussions with Welsh Government and public health in particular, we as policing have had the opportunity within that group to influence the messaging that was going forward, keeping an eye on communications that were being delivered at local level, reassuring Welsh Government ministers that actually policing and other partners were getting communications materials out to local communities, supermarkets, pharmacies, to make sure that victims had, or potential victims had access to numbers and information for support services if that was needed. And that group continues to work now in terms of being able to consider the recovery picture. There's a national concern right across the board from partners. There's a potential that we will see a surge in reporting once measures are unlocked, and perhaps victims during this time have more confidence in an ability to come forward. The next area that we've been heavily involved in, and most of you will have been aware of this, is the early custody release scheme. So a decision by government to look at creating capacity within the prison estate by looking to release low-risk prisoners who were close to their statutory release dates in any event. Our influence in that space has been a weekly call between myself, ACC Gilmer and directors of HMPPS in Wales to have a dynamic briefing about the very fluid policy decisions that were being made from the centre. This has allowed us a number of different opportunities. Firstly, was to make sure that policing information and intelligence was being shared and helps inform the decision making of those who were released, so that we all had a collective agreement about the risk and how manageable that would be. Also to influence some suggested ideas about how accommodation and support arrangements might be delivered. I have to say that process has worked really well, albeit the actual numbers who have been released through that scheme have been quite low. I hope allaying concerns that were initially there, and that's because of the very, very stringent criteria in terms of risk and safeguarding that was put in place at the outset. That engagement has also allowed us to have very early opportunity to understand the number of domestic abuse perpetrators who were currently on statutory supervision to HMPPS across the South Wales and Wales area, and in particular for our Public Protection Department to work very closely with HMPPS specialists to look to how to see how we could bring resources together to make sure we kept organisational surveillance on some of those more higher risk domestic abuse perpetrators, where probation service delivery had to modify itself and perhaps wasn't having as regular contact through normal mechanisms. So again, that piece of work has been recognised, I think, by ministers and is being held up as an exemplar piece of work. And lastly, many of you will be aware that I have a lead role, and the Commissioner has a role in the Youth Justice and Female Offender Blueprints, which are two strands of a large transformation programme launched by Welsh Government and UK Government ministers to look at transforming the system for those cohorts in Wales. During this time, although the blueprint activity broadly has been paused, we have sought to redirect our resources to make sure that we continued to push any actions at pace that might help the operational response to support women and young people. So particularly around the female offender blueprint, I've held fortnightly team calls to look at what we could do in supporting women who are coming out in that early release space, women in the system who are victims of domestic abuse, and just making sure that we have got stringent and robust measures in place. I've also at the frequency of the Wales Women Justice Board, so this is attended by over 30 plus partners right across Wales and the sector, and also has UK government partners in attendance. And we've been meeting now on a four weekly pattern to make sure that we bring to bear all our resources and thinking in terms of problem solving any issues that are coming up in that agenda that cannot be solved at a local level. And I'm sure that Bernie may have some comments I want to add to that. So that's really the three main areas for me that I wanted to highlight. And again, as Lee and the Commissioner said, happy to take any questions.
Lovely, thanks very much indeed. So if I may, Chair, I'll just come in on two final points. One, I suppose, am I being heard okay?
Yeah.
One is the issue of substance misuse. I think, again, I mentioned in my report in January the way in which we were working closely with colleagues across the PSBs in Swansea and Neath Port Talbot, where the level of drug deaths has been second only to Blackpool across England and Wales. And also, this is an issue that the Chief Constable and myself have pushed further, and which led to debate in the All Wales Policing group. Very pleased at the extent to which Public Health Wales, even during this period, has been willing to continue to engage with us on saying what can we do differently in the future. And also a positive response as well from the local health board, as well as the leadership that's being provided by the Chief Superintendent, Joe Marl, and particularly by Karen Jones, the Deputy Chief Executive in Neath Port Talbot, in making sure that even at a time when the pandemic is taking so much attention, we don't lose track of what is also a big challenge to criminal justice and to health, as well as to the whole of our society. The final thing I just wanted to mention is the events of the last few days with the death of George Floyd in the United States. I think very often when things happen internationally, we look and think, well, that's not something that's happening here. The Chief Constable and indeed the Association of Chief Constables felt that the impact of the events in America was so dramatic and so at odds with the standards of policing that we accept in Britain, that they have to start to make their comments Matt Jukes has made his comments, and a statement was issued by the Association of Chief Police Officers yesterday. Also yesterday, because commissioners have felt in the same way that we couldn't disregard the impact of those events, a statement has been made. And Emma and I responded with the following statement. Standing up for the basic principles of humanity and democracy and the core values of policing is at the heart of the role of the Police and Crime Commissioner. Those core values are about the very nature of democratic policing, that the police are the community and the community are the police, and that the first responsibility of the police is to prevent crime, not just be a force to respond when bad things happen. There will always be a need for the police in particular, as well as society as a whole, to respond to crime and to tackle violence and exploitation. But it is crucial that they do so as a part of society and not as a sort of external or occupying force. When that happens, their authority has been lost, whereas it's crucial for the police to be the police of the public and not the police of the state. Those principles are the ones that we apply in the area for which we have responsibility, but they are principles that must apply in every community, in every country, and at all times. Racism and any impression that some lives matter less than others has to be rooted out everywhere. And in making the commitment to play our part locally, we stand with those internationally who call for an end to racism and who remind the world that Black Lives Matter. We were very impressed by the powerful statement made by our own Health Minister, Vaughan Getting, on behalf of the Welsh Government in response to the death of George Floyd and the subsequent events in America, as well as to the concerns here in Wales. And we strongly endorse his statement as fully reflecting the principles and aspirations that we hold in Wales. I thought it was only fair, as members of the panel may have seen that statement, but to ensure that you see it in full, and I account to the panel for what we have said there in the dramatic events that have taken place in the last few days. So although the main focus has been on coronavirus, I thought, Chair, it was only fair to report on that aspect as well in concluding my remarks. And having made that submission to the panel, we stand ready to take questions in the way that you proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I thought that was very, very, very interesting. So on that basis, can I also say that I think as a panel we would endorse your statement with regard to Black Lives Matter, and I think we would like to be associated with them as well. I don't think you'll get any distraction from that. Can I move on and move to questions? And I'm going to call each panel member alphabetically, if I may. So on that basis, it's Councillor Bowen Thompson is first. Do you have any questions?
Yes, I do, and thank you. It was I words, and I was the panel with that statement as well. It was really good to see that. In the information that you provide, you said that if we wanted to do a update on the implications at the future panel meeting, and I think that would be really welcome, especially given that we're starting to see quite move up gradually and starting to, yeah.
Bernie, I'm sorry about this. You're breaking up quite badly. I'm not sure why that should be. Do you want to have another attempt and start again?
Yeah.
If it breaks up again, I'll let you know, and I'll move on and I'll come back to you at the end. Is that okay?
That's no problem. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
That sounded better. Yes, indeed.
Better. I did have a notice saying my internet was a bit unstable, so hopefully I was just wanted to say I welcome the statement as well in relation to Black Lives Matter and the panel being associated with that statement out. In the were provided, you mentioned that an update on the financial implications could be given at a future panel meeting, and I'd really welcome that, particularly if we're starting to see that the crime figures are returning to what would have been expected levels in previous years. So it seems right to wait a little bit and see what's happening. But I would like to ask you specifically how to continue successful approach you explain, encourage.
Sorry, we lost question.
And Chair, can I suggest if Bernie would like to put the question in a note, I'll try and answer it when we come back to answers. Would that be okay?
Well, what I'm going to suggest, if you don't mind, Bern, if you could type your question into the chat box on the right-hand side, and
that's what I meant. Yeah.
And I'll come back to you then for that question at the end. Is that okay? Okay, then. Yes, great. On that, right. That said, then can I invite Councillor Cowan, please, to if you have any questions.
I do, thank you. And just to reinforce what Bernie said, can I be associated with the very powerful statement that Black Lives Matters? I think it's really important at this time, and I think it will be, good if everybody could associate themselves with that. Just as a positive as well, the work on domestic violence, which Emma's been doing, sounds, quite extraordinary. The levels and the detail that you're doing and putting into that important matter at this time is fantastic. So thank you very much. A couple of specific questions, which you may need to come back to me on. In relation to the VE celebrations, I think we've seen this up and down the country and further, really. How many people were actually fined as a result of breaching the kind of lockdown rules at the time? And also, generally speaking, how many people have been fined to date in Wales? And the last question is, I've spoken to a policeman fairly recently, and basically they were saying that the levels of calls have been on occasions higher than at New Year's Eve, talking to people who have got concerns about groups of people congregating in parks and in spaces. And I appreciate we do need to work constructively with the public, which is what we do on a daily basis. But I really do feel that on occasions we do need a more hardline approach. And I think often fines are practically the only way that you can actually hit somebody where it hurts, really. So if you could just reflect on those questions, I'd be very grateful.
Commissioner, do you want to respond to that? You're muted, Commissioner. Ah, there
Yeah.
we go.
Sorry, I'm back. Happy to do it either way. Bernie raised the issue of financial implications, and if the panel is okay, we will certainly come back with a detailed report to the next meeting of the panel when I think it'll all be clear. It's clear that there are going to be financial implications. The government has allowed us to use money that has been given to us for the uplift for immediate purposes, but that will need to be reimbursed, otherwise we won't be able to employ the police that we're recruiting. But clearly there will be implications, and I'm happy to report in more detail next time. As far as Councillor Cowan's question, I'm grateful to her and to Bernie for the endorsement of our statement. It's good to have that cross-political view of a common sense of purpose about what policing is about, and that's really appreciated. Also, I appreciate her interest in domestic violence and abuse. And what I would suggest is that we will, again, at the next panel meeting, have a better sense of what the impact of COVID has been, whether there's an upsurge afterwards, as we mentioned earlier. So we'll report in detail on that, as well as coming back on the impact of the DRIVE programme. We are seeing a reduction during the period that DRIVE has been in being in domestic violence in places like Cwm Taf. So I'm sure the panel will be very interested in the detail there. As far as the celebrations and then the issue of fining more generally, yes, we can certainly provide detailed figures for the panel, but in general, our level of fining has been less than in other places. I think that's partly because, for instance, Dyfed-Powys has seen a real problem with large numbers, or significant numbers at least, coming long distances into their area and to the Pembrokeshire coast, as they've seen in North Wales, and we haven't had the same problems there. Both we and Gwent have seen a lot of people complying and turning back when the rules are pointed out to them. And the final point is that on the high level of calls, yes, there has been a very high level of calls, particularly over the last 2 weekends. I think Lee may be able to give some more detailed figures there, but I think there are two aspects to it. One is that you get people breaching the regulations, and obviously people having concerns about that, but then also some people having concerns that are not justified. There are some places where, for instance, people have been out walking but have been distancing, and that isn't a matter of concern as long as they're obeying the rules and exercising locally and returning home afterwards and observing the distancing rules. So there have been some calls, if we can put it, that sort of weren't really justified, as well as calls that were. Lee, do you want to add to that?
Yes, sorry. Just very quickly, in terms of the finance, you are right. I think it's still a work in progress, but there is work being done by both the Chief Finance Officers, so Peter Curran on behalf of the Commissioner and Uma Hussain on behalf of the Force, that they're tracking the costs and trying to account for any additional costs or activity. So I think when that's been, it would be more appropriate to bring that back anyway. In terms of Councillor Cowan's request in terms of total fines, I suppose for South Wales Police and nationally, as I mentioned when I touched earlier, we do know as of last weekend, South Wales Police have issued 216 fixed penalty notices. Now, the breakdown of those in terms of whether they're first fines or accruing the additional costs, not entirely clear at the moment. But again, we can certainly bring a breakdown of that, including the number of fixed penalty notices, COVID fixed penalty notices issued, can also be can be provided, because the figures across each force are being shared. So again, we can bring the national picture back to you. But just in relation to call volume, if it is of interest to the panel, in terms of 999 calls, total 999 calls since lockdown began are 25,211 in comparison to 34,514 for the same period in 2019. So there's actually a fall of 20%. There was a spike, as we've mentioned on a couple of occasions during the VE Day celebrations, where there were in total 801 calls, which was a higher number than sort of average for a weekend. But in terms of call volume then to 101, there have been some changes to the way calls are managed. So the direct comparison is a little tricky, but this is in the larger impact of lockdown. 101 calls have generally have had a lower volume in comparison to 2019, but with the most notable exception being the VE Day, which saw one of the busiest days in force history for calls. So that peak day was there were 2,239 calls to South Wales Police. So that could be what the officer was referring to, Councillor Cowan, when you were talking about the increased demand in terms of calls. Interestingly, it then levelled off the following day. It probably helped with the weather, took a bit of a turn the following day, but also I think everyone focused obviously on the VE celebrations. So but in terms of volume call, demand 999 and 101, they're the actual figures that we have at the moment. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Lee. Councillor Cowan, are you happy with that?
Yes, thanks. I think you've given me some clarity. I would be interested to look at the kind of breakdown which you referred to, but as a kind of a local councillor, I'm also getting lots of calls from people locally seeing large groups of people undertaking sport and recreation. And I just wanted to say in a kind of a constructive way, it would be useful on occasions for them to kind of be, how do I put this in a way I want trying to put it. I understand, the last kind of resort is the people want to be fined and kind of heavy-handed, but I think sometimes there needs to be a kind of like a couple of tweets and things from the police saying, this is serious, COVID is a real danger out there, and then perhaps more people would kind of respect that view. I just think on occasions it needs to be a little bit stronger.
It is a very difficult balance, and it's something that I've paid a lot of attention to. You're absolutely right, because some people have concentrated purely on what they see as breaches of the regulations, and in some cases those haven't been breaches. So give an example that there were some people raising the issue of numbers of people crossing the Cardiff Bay Barrage. Well, that's within my distance for exercise each day, so I've seen with my own eyes, and I agree with the police judgment that actually the compliance with distancing of people who were taking exercise there was quite remarkable. Courtesy, people stepping out of each other's way, and therefore the fact that there were significant numbers was of no real interest to the police, nor of a health danger.
I agree.
Now, on the other hand, there are some places where you have people congregating and disregarding the distancing, and I think that's the sort of example that you're talking about. Now, the message that we put across is it must be a health message. That is to obey the rules that have been set down for the protection of public health, and engaging people with obeying those rules, rather than seeing it purely as being worried about a policeman coming to arrest them if they breach the rules, because those rules are there for a reason. Part of the problem of, for instance, media and social media in particular having a focus just when people breach the rules is it almost builds up an impression that everybody is breaking the rules, which gives the impression then to people, well, why should I bother if nobody else is? Well, actually, most people have been obeying the rules really well in South Wales, and I made the contrast with some of the situation in parts of England earlier. So I take entirely the point that you're making, and I assure you that police officers are told on a daily basis in the daily notes to officers that go out that they have the full support of Silver Command in enforcing the rules, issuing fines if it's appropriate to do so, but they also have the message, try encouragement and engagement first. So hopefully we're getting the balance right. And as I say, that has been a matter of considerable discussion between myself and the Chief Constable in trying to make sure that we do get the balance right.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'd like to go back now, if I may, to Councillor Bowen Thompson. You can see in the chat box there that we have a question from her. I know you can all see it, but I'll read it out anyway. It's a question to the Commissioner about confidence. How confident are you that the force will have the capacity and resource to continue the successful approach you've used so far? Would you like to comment?
Yes, it's a very good question. I mean, I'm confident that we've got the resources and the right sort of engagement with the public. But of course, as Councillor Bowen Thompson says in the latter part of a question, we're moving to a different phase of recovery. And in that different phase, it's less a matter of policing and more a question of public behaviour, because of course the government, the Welsh government and the UK government, and indeed the governments of Scotland and Northern Ireland, have moved to a situation where more people are able to meet within very strict rules, meeting other members of their families, meeting two families, and so on and so forth. And an awful lot of that really has to depend on people understanding those rules and sticking to them. It will be very, very difficult to police in the same way. So it's moving away from the direct police enforcement to the more community understanding of why it is we have to limit our behaviour in the next phase of responsibility. But the police will continue to play their part. We have revised the note that we prepared, which police officers have available and which is on the website, which lists for people what we're asking them to do, what Welsh Government is asking them to do, and tries to put over in simple terms, these are the things we really want you to stick to. And I would commend that simple summary to councillors as well as to our police officers in trying to help people to understand what they need to do for the protection of public health, not just because police officers or government is asking them to do, but because these rules are there for the protection of public health. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Councillor Bowen Thompson, are you content?
Yes, I'm really that approach still content. We need to keep implications into our capacity of our team to be able to do that. So I look forward within financial.
Okay, Bernie, you're breaking up really badly, but I'll take it from that you're happy. Just put a thumbs up. Thank you for that. Can I ask Mr. Ian Fox, are you happy to ask a question?
Yes, morning. Can everyone hear me okay if you can't see me? Thanks very much for your report, Commissioner. And I agree that the overall profile of the police appears to have been correct in these circumstances. My question to you relates to the implications of the relaxation of lockdown. And with the gradual relaxation, with kind of restaurants opening, people becoming possibly less concerned about catching this virus. If there are inevitably hotspots or bubbles of infection which will occur because of the relaxation, what's provisional contingency plans or tactics will the force need to deploy? Because it strikes me that the style which has been operated to date has matched the macro issue, and it's been very effective, and I think we're all grateful for that. People have responded, certainly in my part of West Swansea. But say, for example, Mumbles or Gower was identified as a hotspot. We had a sudden spike in cases. What different policing tactics would you anticipate being deployed in those circumstances?
Thank you, Ian. I think that's a very good question. If I may say so, I think that's one of the problems, the way that this pandemic has been dealt with by central government, because the nearest comparison I can think of is foot and mouth disease, where the whole of the country, particularly in rural areas, but it affected towns as well, was put into a lockdown. And I was then Minister of State for Rural Affairs, concerned with the freeing up of the rural economy in England. And the fact is at that time that you couldn't deal with different regions of England in the same way. And I know that some of my colleagues as commissioners have been very concerned, for instance, in Merseyside, where the level of R is significantly higher than other parts of England, that the whole country is being dealt with on the basis of what seems appropriate in London. I think you raise a very interesting point as to whether we may see a concentration of cases in particular areas. We would have to be driven by decisions made on the basis of public health. So, of course, there would be a role for the police if there was a decision that stricter rules or greater enforcement was needed in particular towns or cities. And that would be in response to a request that would come through the emergency mechanisms to the police to do that. We're also very conscious, of course, that there is the well-publicized risk of a second spike. And if that were to happen, of course, then some of the rules that have been relaxed may then have to be reintroduced. But again, that would be on a public health basis and matters for government to decide, and then for the police to act in support of the public health priorities that were laid down there. And that's certainly in our minds going forward, to respond as appropriate in that way.
Thanks for that, Commissioner. I'm happy with that. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. That's very kind of you. Okay. Right. I've noticed that Councillor Evans has rejoined the meeting, and as we're not making decisions here, we are simply asking questions around the report given by the Commissioner. I'm going to invite Councillor Evans to see if he's got a question for the Commissioner in the interests of clarity. Councillor Evans?
Yes, thank you, Chair. No, I haven't got anything specific for the Commissioner today. I've listened intently to what he just said, and I go along with what his response was. So I haven't got anything personally myself. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Evans. In that case, then I'll move on to Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for what you've presented today. My question really followed on from the last meeting we had, where you give a fairly lengthy update with regards to finances and in terms of recruitment of additional police officers following the ability to add those. So my question was around, how has recruitment and selection of those new officers, or plans for the recruitment and selection of new officers, been affected by COVID? And in terms of those who were going to be leaving the force, has there been an uplift of churn of people taking retirement, and has that then affected the ability to backfill those posts in addition to creating the new posts? So it was a question around levels of officers and recruitment. Separately, have any extra powers been given to PCSOs in terms of enforcement during COVID-19? I appreciate that you're talking about education, but I just wondered if there had been any in that regard. So it was more a question about how future plans for recruitment have been affected.
Thanks very much. They're very good questions. Firstly, as far as recruitment is concerned, there has been the use of virtual interviews and things like that to proceed. In fact, since lockdown and since the last meeting of the panel, we've recruited 2 new assistant chief constables. I took part in those interviews along with the chief constable. The 2 people that we appointed have actually taken up their roles and arrived, which is good news in terms of maintaining the continuity of management at the top of the force. And I know that the chief constable has been continuing. Oh, I beg your pardon. Has been continuing with promotion panels as well. And a lot of those have been done virtually in order to make sure that there aren't gaps as senior and experienced officers leave at the top of the force. I think, again, there are probably some things that have changed in terms of people being asked perhaps to stay on a little longer. The police system allows people to when they retire, having completed 30 years, to do so at very short notice. But I think there's been a lot of solidarity there. So probably it would be fairer to come back with a report at the next meeting on how that's been affected. And there have been, for instance, retired officers that have come back in supportive roles as part. We didn't have to advertise for that. I asked the chief constable whether he intended to advertise, and he said he didn't need to because he was getting enough offers from officers coming back, which shows something of the relationship between South Wales Police and former officers. So and it's also one of the things I should have said in terms of the capacity that we've got, that whereas there were some worries about officers not being able to fulfill their duties because of needing testing from COVID, that has come into place, and actually the level of abstraction as a result of illness is lower than normal. So that has enabled the chief constable to maintain a satisfactory availability of the force throughout recent weeks. As far as the recruitment of new officers through the uplift as a result of the additional money provided by the UK government, number one, my understanding is that recruitment and the movement of people into training is being maintained. So we're still on target to maintain the level of recruitment that the Home Office has funded. And as I mentioned earlier, they've given us flexibility. So the money that was given for the recruitment and the employment this year, they're allowing us to spend early, which has given more cash flow flexibility to the force. There wasn't an absolute guarantee that that money would be made up later, but the responses that we had in our conversation with the police minister, I'm confident that that is the intention, so that therefore we'll be able to maintain the employment and the recruitment. The final question you asked was about the PCSO powers. Yes, early into the to the provision of additional powers to the police, the chief constable spoke to me and said that it was his intention to extend the powers of PCSOs to the enforcement of the COVID-19 regulations. I agreed with that approach. It's an operational decision for the chief, but he certainly did it with my support because of the very positive role they were playing. And it was sensible in asking PCSOs to encourage and educate for them to have those powers in reserve should they need to exercise them. So yes, that was done. I think about 2 weeks into the provision of those powers, and that continues.
Councillor Gray, you happy?
Yes, thank you. The only thing was, what are those extra powers? Sorry, was the question. So, what additionally are they able to do? Is it just they could do everything they could do before, but it just applies to COVID, or is there anything extra they've been given?
Yeah, it's that they can actually fine people under the COVID powers, which is an additional power that they wouldn't normally have. I think we remain very much of the mind that the role of the PCSO has to be in being engaged in the local community, encouraging, educating, and that there's a line over which that role becomes more difficult. But it was felt, and as I say, I agreed with the Chief Constable on this, that during this emergency, extending their powers and their activity remained consistent with that public engagement that we encouraged them to undertake.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Councillor Gray. Councillor Jago.
Good morning, thank you. Yeah, first of all, I too would like to associate myself with the Black Lives Matter. So I'd just like that on record, please. And my question this morning is in relation to the child protection element of the Commissioner's report. So South Wales Police recorded 54% fewer crimes against children in April 2020 when compared with the same period in 2019, which is a significant decrease, I'm sure you'll agree. It also states that agencies such as NSPCC, Childline, etc., have also confirmed that they have not seen an increase in the number of referrals either. So my question is, are you concerned with these figures? My concern is that children may be at risk of because they've been left unseen. The lockdown may trigger more abuse or neglect behind closed doors because these children are not being seen. Do you feel that we'll see a spike in child protection referrals when more children are being exposed and seen through school attendance, etc., when we reach a new state of normal then? And what are you doing as a force and a commissioner to try and mitigate this? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Jago. I think it's a really good question, and yes, I am very concerned. But the simple answer is that we don't know. On the one hand, there are places where children are able to express their concerns when they go to school, when they go to a GP's practice. Other places like playgroups or youth clubs and so on, the places where they're in contact with people, a trusted adult that they may be able to disclose problems is not available to them at the moment. On the other hand, there are other things that can't happen. People can't go in and out of each other's homes. Visits by members of an extended family or by people who are not part of the family, less alcohol, people not coming back from the pub. So there are a lot of things that have changed in the current circumstances. So what have we done? As I mentioned earlier, the Chief Constable and myself have been at pains to work with helplines, with children's charities, to make it clear that anything reported to the police will be acted on during the COVID-19 emergency, just as it would normally. I mean, there are some of the statistics that are quite encouraging. For instance, on domestic violence, although the number of reports are down, the number of arrests aren't, which rather suggests that on what the police know about, they have been acting as vigorously as they would in normal circumstances, which I think is, is a tribute to the actions that are taken by our officers when things come to their attention. we will continue to work with the children's charities. I do think that we need to be alert to reports that come forward as perhaps some of those lines of contact emerge. Children going back to school may well be an opportunity for communication there. And it's very much at the forefront of the minds of operational policing and ourselves as my team to make sure that we do all we can. So as I say, the honest answer is we don't know what we don't know, but I share your concern that we should find out what we don't know as soon as possible, working with our partners. I wonder if Lee's got anything that he can add from the operational reports that he receives on my behalf. Lee?
Yeah. Lee?
Yes, of course. Again, thank you, Councillor, for the question. This was an area that came out yesterday, and the Commissioner is right. I mean, when you have these hidden crimes, you don't know what you don't know. But what I would say is it is an area of focus and concern for the Commissioner and for the force. And so it is an area where the Public Protection Unit in particular are looking to work very closely with partners. Some of that is the messaging that's going out, but also they are looking to identify what the figures and the data that we do have in comparison as well. So if there are any trends, any areas where they can be more proactive, certainly work is going on to look at that. In terms of public protection referrals since lockdown, there is a 22% reduction, but as you say, it is still something where there's a big red flag for the force, that they know it's an area of concern, very much how you've raised, Commissioner, Councillor, and as the Commissioner has stated. So I think it's one where everyone is very live to. It will continue to be monitored, and we'll continue to look at this. And obviously, if there are issues, we can look to bring them back. But I have been assured from our meeting yesterday that it was an area, and there is a lot of data which they're constantly looking to review and to see whether they can be more proactive, and to see what will happen when, as lockdown issues release, whether issues will start to emerge.
Thank you.
Emma may have something to add on this as well. Emma?
Yes, thanks. Yes, thanks for the question, and echo what the Commissioner and Lee have said in terms of the concerns, but also the absolute focus in being able to keep an eye on it. I just wanted to add from a strategic point that South Wales Police are fully immersed in a Children and Young People's Board that's been set up by Welsh Government. That means that we've got direct lines to education and social services policy leads to think about this in its broadest terms and make sure that we're fully informed of all information, as well as our engagement with safeguarding boards at a local level as well. So just wanted to reassure colleagues that whilst we don't know the extent, we are absolutely plugged in with all the relevant stakeholders. So where that we do have that information, we're able to plan, collaborate together and respond.
Thank you, Emma.
I think it's fair to say as well, Richard, that there will be issues of this sort where we know that there may be unreported events where the public services boards will come into their own once they restore their activity. And as I mentioned earlier, the Mark Brace, my Assistant Commissioner, is engaging with them across the local authorities with a view to that.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. Yes, of course. Councillor Jago, you happy?
Yes, thank you very much. The only thing that I would add is that, as obviously safeguarding and child protection is everybody's business, and I'm happy to distribute information via social media, etc., with key messages from the Commissioner and his team to say that everybody's got to have eyes on these children, because it's everybody's responsibility as well. So the more publicity we can get out there to say that we are still taking action, and there's still a process in place to look after children, that would be reassuring.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Councillor Jacob. Mel Jale, please.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Can I just say I also wish to be associated with the Black Lives Matter campaign, and I'd like to thank the Commissioner and indeed all his team for the excellent report that's been submitted this morning and given to us. And in particular, I'd highlight a couple of things that I saw in the report, which perhaps haven't been touched on yet. First of all, the welfare hub, because I'm conscious during all of this, we've got hugely committed staff, both support and police officers, and our volunteers that require support. I know from a personal level, because my daughter, my daughter's partner, my brother, everybody is involved, and I know that from first hand the commitment, and not just that, the sacrifices they're personally making to making sure that South Wales is a safer place. So I really wish to applaud the work that South Wales Police, just reading about the welfare hub and talking to officers and staff of South Wales Police, I know how highly that's been valued. And it just goes to show the commitment of South Wales Police in making sure it looks after its staff, just as well as the health service and other organisations are looking after their staff. So I just wanted to make a point of that. That's been really noted by myself, and I'm sure by my colleagues. And I just want to applaud everyone that's been pushing the commitment that we've given for a long while to enhancing the level of the DRIVE project. And it's a fantastic result to see the DRIVE, which I'm hugely involved in myself as the board member of Safer Merthyr Tydfil and pushing it. I've seen the impact it's had both in RCT and in Merthyr Tydfil, and to see it now going across South Wales is a fantastic result. So I just want to say that. And also the work that we're doing in relation to, you mentioned earlier on, Commissioner, about crime is still happening. You know, we've seen murders, rapes, the whole remit of crime is still happening alongside this crisis that we're going through. And South Wales Police, in my opinion, time and time again are coming up, and they're showing not just they're supporting the community at times of hardship and of concern, but also that they're supporting the most vulnerable in our community, which picks up on the work that Emma and her team have been doing on your behalf throughout South Wales. And I just think we need to stop now and think, I know this is about scrutiny, I know this is about governance, but it's also about acknowledging the good work that's been going as well. And Lee mentioned the work of the specialists. When I read through your report, and to see the hours that they're putting in at a time when they could be looking in another direction and focus on their own work, it is absolutely commendable. And it just goes to show to me that the slogan I've got on top, making every contact count, that certainly since this crisis has happened, that South Wales Police, with its partner agencies, have been doing its very best to make every contact count. And I'm sure there are individuals in our community have felt that contact and really felt supported in everything that they're doing. That was my observation. The question I pose is in relation to the future, and this is just a sort of, I wonder, how is policing going to change as we move forward in the future?
Commissioner, would you like to respond to that? I think you're muted, Commissioner.
Yes, and my mouse didn't want to work. Sorry. I think that's a very big question, which could occupy us for a very long time indeed. Can I separate it into two things? One is I think the impact of the pandemic and the finances and organizational issues may lead to some changes in the government's approach to policing across England and Wales. I hope it won't lead to an impact in terms of resources, because the government's decision to increase recruitment and give us the additional police officers which enable the police to do a good job is starting to see a positive impact. I hope very much that we don't go back on that, but I do appreciate that the government and all governments and all public bodies are going to face some really challenging times ahead. So I think I'm not going to predict in response to Mel's question. I'm going to say that the financial challenges are going to be difficult for all of us in the next few years, and I hope that it won't be too damaging to the resources available to policing. The second thing is more locally. I believe that the very vigorous way in which South Wales Police have engaged with the period of COVID, as I say, not being afraid to enforce when it's necessary, not resigning from doing their day job on the crime that's continuing in any event, but also being in the community, part of the community, and following the engage, explain, encourage before enforcing, has actually strengthened the relationship between our police officers and local teams and the communities that they police. I've heard very positive responses from people generally, as I have from members of the panel this morning. So my hope, Mel, would be that our police officers in our area in South Wales have even greater authority and ability to work with the community for the safety and benefit of all.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mel. Can I invite Councillor Lewis next, please?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, good.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just firstly to align myself with the comments made by the Commissioner with regards to the killing of George Floyd, of course, in Minnesota in America, and also to the Black Lives Matter campaign. With regards to the, got an issue here with my screen, excuse me. Apologies, Chair. I seem to have an issue with my screen here. One moment.
We can hear you okay.
We can hear you okay. Would you like me to come back to you, Councillor Lewis?
Yes, please, Chair. Sorry about this.
Not a problem. Okay, Councillor Rees, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And can I also, like other panel members, associate the Commissioner's comments about the Black movement that's been so widely reported on, and endorse his remarks. And can I thank you all, the team, Emma and Lee and the Commissioner, for their update, and also, Commissioner, for your recognition of the work that Karen Jones in Neathport Talbot has been doing. Thanks for that. I just got one question, really. The exploitation of our older citizens, particularly during this lockdown, by telephone scammers, and the way. And I just wondered, have you seen a rise in this form of crime, and what actions are being taken to try to prevent it? I know it's it's probably to do with intercoms and so on and so forth, but I just wondered if there was some kind of action being taken to protect the most vulnerable people. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. Again, I'll ask Lee if he's got any up-to-date figures. I don't personally. What I do know is that there is general concern on the part of Welsh Government and the police about the danger of scams in relation to the track and trace. And we're going to some lengths to try to give a very, very clear message that in doing the tracking and tracing, that's entirely about health. It won't involve asking people for their bank accounts, for example, which is the big danger. As Lee mentioned earlier, there are indications of people using new methods during the time of COVID and exploiting any opportunity. Do you have anything to add, Lee?
It was simply to say, actually, I don't have the exact figures, but I'm sure we can come back to you. It was an area of concern. There was a spike at the outset in terms of fraud and fraudulent scams, and I think there was also some concern around track and testing, and that's why you'll see, particularly within Welsh Government, they're at pains to say if you are getting a call, it won't be about bank details or anything along those lines, because unfortunately there are unscrupulous people even through a global pandemic. But as it happens, obviously there is a considerable crossover here between policing and local authorities, particularly local authority trading standards teams. So we have been working quite hard, joining both South Wales Police with your local authority trading standards teams, who have actually been quite proactive. I think I've read recently in terms of Merthyr and RCT and Swansea, I think recently have prosecuted people around this, and I know it's been an issue around the Cardiff area as well. So very much on the agenda. As I said, there was an initial spike, then it kind of, I was speaking to trading standards recently, it tailed off slightly with another slight increase around track and tracing. So I think it's an ongoing picture. Again, some of it, as you quite rightly mentioned, Councillor, is very much online, some activities. But the activities which aren't online are quite a bit easier to track down. So we are aware there were some scams of people knocking on elderly people's doors to clean drives and stuff. COVID-19 levels of cleanliness and rubbish like that. But it hasn't quite peaked as large as we thought, but it is on everyone's radar, and I will take it back to the force to see if they have got some specific figures for you, if that's okay.
Thank you, Lee.
If I may, Richard, I'd
sorry, yes,
no, it's just that there are a number of issues that have been raised where councillors are asking things where we can give some indication, but clearly things are going to become clearer over the coming weeks. And we'll hold all those questions that have been raised as issues to report back to the panel on in due course, if we may.
Yeah, by all means, yes. Thank you for that, Commissioner. Councillor Rees, are you happy?
Yeah.
That's great. Yes, thank you very much. Thanks for those replies.
Okay, thanks for that. I'll go back now to Councillor Lewis.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think I resolved the issue, slight technical issue. I was just aligning myself with the Commissioner and Chief Constable's comments with regards to the Black Lives Matter movement, and of course which has arisen in recent years, and of course the recent killing of George Floyd in Minnesota. I think it's important we all do what we can to root out discrimination, prejudice and racism, not just of course in a policing context, but in wider society as well. So I think that's important to say. Turning to another matter, if I may, Chair, a local matter in comparison. It's pleasing to hear the Commissioner say that of course the police service hasn't taken its eye off the day-to-day activities, albeit in difficult, challenging circumstances with the current pandemic. I know that the lower and the upper Cynon Valley in particular, though I suspect it's not unique to those areas, has been experiencing large amounts of antisocial behaviour related to off-road bikes. I know that in the Cardiff area, I believe there's Operation Red Manor, which is currently in progress, a partnership there between the council and the police looking to tackle this issue. Again, I understand it may sound inconsequential to many, but the antisocial effects of off-road biking, particularly on local paths and trails, for example, which many more people are now using because they are exercising locally, has certainly made its way to me, and I suspect to other councillors as well. So my question is, perhaps building upon the experiences learnt in the Cardiff area with this Operation Red Manor, whether there's any scope to perhaps extend that to the Valleys areas, whether there's any resource for that, and also it seemed to have coincided with what I think is an admirable policy or directive from Welsh Government, which seeks to remove physical barriers from paths such as the Taff Trail, which I can understand to try and increase use. Unfortunately, it's coincided with this, with a rise in antisocial behaviour related to bikes, and there's been reports of many near misses on the Taff Trail and various other trails, etc., which many people enjoy. So it's just a question around that. I understand it's very much a local issue, but when you live with the effects of this kind of antisocial behaviour, that they can be profound. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Rhys. It's absolutely one of the issues that comes up on a regular basis. In fact, I think I mentioned earlier that we've had calls with council leaders, all 7 local authorities across our area. We've had calls with MPs and we've had calls with assembly members. In both the MPs and AMs calls, several examples came up in Cardiff, but also in Valley areas as well. And it's something that the Chief Constable certainly took away from those discussions as something to focus on with his neighbourhood teams. What I would say is let us know, or let your local chief officer know of problems within your area. Dorian Lloyd was on the call that we had, for instance, with Bridgend yesterday, where it the issue came up, and would be aware of it, I'm sure, in your area as well. So you're quite right. There are issues that are very local, but it is surprising the number of areas right across the South Wales area where this is a local issue. As I say, the Chief Constable has it very much on his mind, Rhys.
You happy, Councillor Lewis?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and apologies for the technical hitch.
No, it's not a problem. This is all right. We're all challenged, I think, at this time. Okay, thank you, Councillor Lewis. I don't believe Councillor Richards is with us, is she? So on that basis, it's Councillor Thomas, please.
I am now unmuted, I believe. You can hear me okay? Yes. Yes, a couple of points, not directly policing, but associated impact on policing. On page 21, for example, we refer to the number of tests, because testing, we have been informed, is so critical moving forward, referring to 690 tests and 245 results. So that's around 37% results from the total number of tests. Now, while I appreciate that some will be pending because they were taken a short while ago, it wouldn't account for that discrepancy between the total number of tests and the number of tests returned. So does that mean that some tests are not being returned, period? Because on that basis, we in the past nationally have talked about getting to 100,000 tests, that means that you'd have 37,000 results. So the fact that you tested that number of people would be largely academic. It's the results that you get back. The second point, again, looking locally a lot across Rhondda and Taff, we've had incidents, particularly from a couple of weeks ago, of it seems to be a large number of people ignoring the rules. Indeed, there was occasion when our council leader had to go on air to voice his concern about the number of people who were going into A&E after drinking alcohol at parties. Has that been a particular level of concern in Rhondda and Taff? And it's associated with that. I often get questions about the use of holiday homes. This seems to have gone on irrespective of the restrictions imposed. Again, what is the experience of the police in addressing that particular issue? Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much indeed for those questions. On the issue of testing, I can't take you into figures, but it is a matter that I've discussed with the Chief Constable on a regular basis. We certainly had concerns at the start of the period. There was a time when tests weren't available, but I have to say it's been a regular discussion on an all Wales basis, and the problems in South Wales have not been the same as they have in one or two other areas. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the testing has been able to take place so that the level of abstraction of people self-isolating went down and has stayed down. And the Chief Constable tells me that he's very satisfied with the level of testing and the way in which that service is being provided. As I say, there may be more statistical information we can give in the fullness of time, but the general issue at the moment is that isn't proving to be a problem area. The second issue on people ignoring the rules, there have been issues about people ignoring the rules in particular local areas, and then it's been a matter for the operational side to focus activities in those areas and seek the support of the community and to work with the local authority in tackling those issues. As I mentioned earlier, it's a very difficult balance to maintain, because on the one hand, you want to say to the public, look, we're all in this together, obey the rules, let's all obey the rules. And the more we talk about people breaking the rules, you start the development of an impression, well, if they're not breaking the rules, if they're not obeying the rules, why should I bother? So it is a question of a careful balance and careful messaging. And I think we've tended to be stressing that the majority of people, and that's the majority of people everywhere, have been obeying the rules, and praising them for that, praising the local community, and on the other hand, appealing to those who aren't obeying the rules to do so, and making it clear that the police will enforce where it's necessary to do so. On the final point on holiday homes, that has been an issue, particularly in North Wales and in Dyfed-Powys. It hasn't been a big issue, and that's the way the Chief Constable put it to me. There are some people who may have gone to holiday homes within the South Wales area, but it's certainly not an issue in big volume or big local concern compared to, for instance, the challenges they've had in Dyfed-Powys and in North Wales.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Are you happy?
Thank you for those answers.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas.
Thank you.
Okay, that only leaves me really, and I just a comment and a question after it. Really, not so much about the police attitude while policing coronavirus, more or less the public's attitude towards the police. As you know, on Thursday evenings we go out and clap for our heroic NHS and key workers, and on one occasion on that we had a police van that actually came up the road and was applauded all the way up, and I've never seen anything like that in Bridgend before, to be perfectly honest with you. I think the driver was taken aback because he slowed down and started waving back. So I think the public's perception of the police and the way that they've handled the coronavirus has certainly gone up. So congratulations to South Wales Police Force on that. Having said that, I have been a little bit concerned since the, shall we say, deviation on the way the lockdown has been carried out in England and in Wales. Since that has gone, I think little cracks have appeared really And one of the cracks is that those people in England that were allowed to travel further than those people in Wales weren't aware of the situation that existed in Wales. And that, to me, is down in no small part to the fact that neither the Westminster government or those officials, nor Public Health England, made the distinction between England and Wales and advised English people not to come into Wales. Now, that is a failure to a certain extent by all the institutions in England to acknowledge the fact that devolution has actually happened. Now, I'm not criticising them per se for doing that. My concern was about the fact that English people are not necessarily interested in what happens in Wales, and unless they're told, then they're going to carry on that they would at home. And I think that's fair enough. What I think it did do is to put an added burden on all 4 Welsh forces, because people were coming into England to beauty spots, like Porthcawl. I include Porthcawl as a beauty spot because it's the only resort we have in Bridgend. But there was Cardiff, and there are other, the Gower, for instance, and in North Wales, there were holiday resorts where English people actually went to and had to be turned back by Welsh forces. Now, I don't know what the attitude of those people that had travelled from England were to being told to turn back. I haven't got any information about that. But in all fairness to them, some of them had travelled quite a long way in the anticipation they could. So my concern really is around the possibility of a second spike and the announcement from the government that there could possibly be local lockdowns. Local lockdowns in England have been announced, and yet Mark Drakeford has said to us there will be no local lockdowns in Wales. Are there any discussions between the 4 Welsh forces and the Home Office to ensure that the message gets out outside Wales if things are different in Wales to England? I think it's an important point, because I think they're only adding to the work to the 4 Welsh forces, because they have to be on the lookout now for people travelling further from England into Wales. And if we do get the advent of the local lockdowns, it's going to confuse the issue even more. So I feel that the communication around this from central government is essential to get right.
I'm pleased to tell you, Richard, that's an issue I raised with the policing minister only this week on behalf of the 4 Welsh commissioners when we had our phone-in with him. So it was a phone-in involving police and crime commissioners for across England and Wales, but we raised that point again because we have raised it repeatedly. The issue of divergence has been a real problem. However, the point that I made to the policing minister, I think this was about a fortnight ago, was that the divergence was from one place, because all the 3 First Ministers in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland had stressed their willingness to try to work to get a 4-way agreement, and the missing element was the Prime Minister. And I do think that has been unfortunate. His responsibility is to be the Prime Minister for the whole of the United Kingdom, and not to make clear when he's speaking about England and when he's speaking about the United Kingdom or about England and Wales, I think has certainly given us some problems. On the other hand, that divergence became more and more obvious. And of course, there was quite a bit of coverage about the Welsh difference in the national news, and a lot of that coverage actually was very positive about the way that decisions were being taken and communicated in Wales. So in balance, I would say that this period has actually been something of a success for devolution. Firstly, that the 4 Welsh police forces working in the devolved environment have worked coherently together and with Welsh government because we all serve the same population across Wales. And secondly, that we've spoken one with one voice to central government in saying, please make it clear when you're speaking about regulations in England, when you're speaking about regulations in Wales. As far as conformity is concerned, people coming across the border into beauty spots in the North Wales and Dyfed-Powys areas have been more of a problem than they have in South Wales and Gwent, and for that reason the level of fines that have been imposed there has been much greater. It was quite noticeable in a report from the Chief Constable in Gwent that on one particular weekend when this started to build up, they'd had motorcyclists coming across the border in 3 figures, but she pointed out that the vast majority of those, as soon as it was pointed out they were in Wales, that the regulations didn't allow them to come and they should go home, did turn around and go back. And I think there was only in single figures the number of fines that they had to issue on people who were disinclined to listen. So it's been a problem, but less of a problem in South Wales than in other parts of Wales. And yes, we have spoken with one voice as 4 police and crime commissioners in Wales saying, look, make it clear where you're speaking. We also spoke, for instance, the College of Policing brought out some information which was purely about England. The second lot of information they brought it out made very clear in both the advice for officers in Wales and in the officers advice for officers in England what the distinctions were. So again, we've engaged and improved the standard of communication as time has gone on. Whether we have spikes, it goes back really to the answer I gave to Ian Fox earlier. Whether we see a differentiation in England and Wales, whether that differentiation may be very local in nature or whether it's regional in nature, we will have to be informed by the information coming from health. And I do know that Public Health Wales is working very closely with Public Health England and with their Scottish and Northern Ireland colleagues to try to make sure that there's the best possible information to inform the decisions of Welsh Government. And of course, it's that decision making that will then set the parameters within which the police will be asked, if necessary, to redouble their efforts.
Yeah, can I thank you, Commissioner? I'm very relieved that those discussions are taking place, in actual fact, because I think it detracts from police forces in Wales, as has been said by other people. Normal crime is still happening. Okay, thank you. That's the end of the questions, actually, Commissioner. So can I thank you and your team for attending today. It was very, very informative. I think there were some very good points brought up. Can I also thank members of the panel for complying with the protocol that Simon sent out. You made my Can I ask Simon to stay on the line at the end of the meeting, please? I haven't been given any other business, so I might just as well close the meeting. However, I will say to each and every member, if I may, please continue to stay safe, and I hope to see you next time. Simon, do you have any other?
Could I, Chair, before you close, do 2 things. One is to thank the members.
I'm afraid you're breaking up very badly.
Oh dear. Is that better?
Yeah. Actually, try now. Yes, try.
Can I thank the members of the panel for their questions, because they were very insightful and helped us to get a real sense of what members of the panel would want from us in future in terms of information in insights.
Yeah, okay. I'm not sure how much the members of the panel picked up at that actually, because I think we're breaking a point back. Yeah. Okay, but I think. Okay. I think we got. I think we got the gist of that. Okay. I have a message that Councillor Thomas, you'd like to make a comment?
Yeah, yes. Just to say, I omitted at the start of my questions to align myself with the Black Lives Matter agenda, which I wholeheartedly support and would like that recorded. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Thomas. Okay.
That was actually the final point I was going to make, Chair, which is to thank all the members of the panel for the comments that they've made, because I think it endorses the fact that all of us have the same aspirations for the high quality of policing that we aspire to in South Wales, and it's good to know that right across party there is that comprehensive and solidarity of view. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you for your time. Yeah, thank you very much for that. Simon, I don't know if you have anything else to say, whether you have any other notices to give?
No, Chair, the only thing I would add now is that the next meeting is on the 15th September. We've got to consider the annual report on that occasion. I'll speak to Lee separately on this because we have discussed this. We also agreed that we would have a presentation on half-year finance as well. So that was something that was agreed, I think, either at the last meeting or the one before that. So no, Chair, nothing further from me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Simon. Oh, you've gone. Will you stay in the line, Simon, afterwards?
Certainly will.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. On that basis, can I thank all the members of the I don't know. You got something on, Zach? No? Okay. I'd just like to thank all the members of the committee for their time and their questions. Please stay. So the meeting is now closed.
Fab. Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Take care, everyone. Stay safe. Bye-bye.